You stare at the red traffic lights on your morning commute and wonder how long your body can survive this endless cycle. In his essay on the shortness of life, written in the year 49, the philosopher Seneca describes a powerful Roman official walking through a massive stone forum. The official is surrounded by a loud crowd of desperate men begging for his political favor. He shakes their heavy hands while praying for his retirement in silence.
He smiles at the massive crowd while dreaming of the day he can finally retreat to his quiet country farm. He drops dead of a massive heart attack on the cold marble stairs before he ever sees his green fields. The tragedy of the delayed escape is the fundamental engine driving the modern global economy. You typed out a formal resignation letter on your personal.
You kept the document in a hidden folder because you feared losing your bi-weekly deposit. You chose the familiar pain of the cubicle over the terrifying unknown of the open field. Fear locks the open door. The rare individuals who successfully escape the massive machine do not wait for a magical retirement date to arrive. They perform a quiet psychological amputation that frees their mind today. Breaking the physical routine requires destroying the psychological anchor. In his text, Discourses from the year 108, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus observes a wealthy man weeping over a broken clay vase on his stone floor. The man possesses massive estates and heavy gold reserves. His entire emotional stability shatters over a cheap piece of molded dirt. Epictetus watches the wealthy man tear his expensive clothes in absolute despair. The philosopher notes a profound mechanical truth about the human mind and physical possessions.
Epictetus notes that the man does not own the vase. The fragile vase owns the man in total. The rat race is not a physical building you walk into every morning at 8 o'clock. It is a psychological state where your internal peace rests on external objects and public opinions. When you require a specific job title to feel valuable, you grant the employer absolute power over your biological mind. You surrender your heavy shield.
You felt this invisible power last week when a younger coworker received a corporate promotion you wanted with a burning hunger. You spent the entire evening brooding in your quiet kitchen, unable to enjoy your evening meal. You stared at the cold wall and let a middle manager dictate your personal worth using a fake paper title. Ego builds the heavy prison.
Conquering the fragile ego stops the bleeding, but escaping the maze requires you to stop fighting battles on terrain owned by the massive house. In his 5th century BC military treatise, The Art of War, the master strategist Sun Tzu describes a foolish general marching his heavy army into a narrow valley. The enemy waits on the high ground with massive stones. The general demands his men fight their way up the steep cliffs. The entire army is slaughtered in the dark mud.
Sun Tzu writes that the victorious warrior wins the battle first and then goes to war. The defeated warrior goes to war and then seeks to win. The corporate hierarchy is the narrow valley. The elite own the high ground and make the absolute rules. When you try to win the rat race by working 80 hours a week and sacrificing your physical health, you are charging up a steep cliff into a rain of arrows.
You can't win the game because the board is designed to absorb your excess energy. You sat in a performance review last month and listened to your boss explain why your massive revenue generation resulted in a tiny bonus. You argued your case using logic and hard numbers. The boss smiled and pointed to the rigid corporate policy handbook. You tried to negotiate with the heavy stones falling on your tired head. You traded your biological youth for a bronze medal in a rigged tournament. Effort funds the invisible master.
Walking off the battlefield stops the heavy arrows.
But breaking through the outer wall requires a heavy weapon, forged in total silence. In his 1645 manual, The Book of Five Rings, the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi describes the absolute necessity of isolation for true physical mastery. Musashi does not train in a loud dojo surrounded by admiring students. He retreats to a dark cave in the heavy mountains. He practices a single sword strike thousands of times in the cold dirt. He eliminates all public performance to focus on lethal physical mechanics. He ignores the applause of the crowd. He sharpens his heavy blade far away from the desperate eyes of his jealous rivals. The greatest masters in human history understood that skill acquisition requires a period of complete social withdrawal. You cannot build a foundation of heavy concrete while people are walking across the wet cement. Silence builds the heavy fortress. When you step back into the light, your heavy skills will speak for themselves, but you must first carve out the isolated time to build them. Escaping the daily grind requires you to build a rare skill that the open market needs. You cannot build a rare skill while you answer useless emails and attend loud corporate meetings. You sat at your desk yesterday and spent 4 hours reacting to digital messages that produced zero real value. You felt exhausted by 5 o'clock despite accomplishing nothing of substance for your own future. You stared at the glowing screen and realized another precious day of your biological youth had vanished into the corporate ether. You traded your finite cognitive bandwidth for the temporary illusion of professional productivity. Distraction serves the massive machine. Building internal power creates the opportunity for exit, but surviving the actual exit requires a brutal reduction in your physical footprint. In his 1854 book Walden, Henry David Thoreau watches his neighbors drag heavy wooden plows across their massive farms. The farmers work themselves to the bone to pay heavy taxes on land they barely have the time to enjoy. Thoreau builds a tiny wooden cabin near a quiet pond for $28. He works only 6 weeks a year. He spends the rest of his time observing the deep woods in silence. He strips away the heavy burden of social expectations and discovers boundless freedom. The corporate system traps you by inflating your desires. They convince you that a massive house and a luxury vehicle are the minimum requirements for human happiness. When you slash your physical expenses to the absolute bone, the money required to buy your freedom drops by 80% overnight. You looked at your bank statement this morning and saw the massive rent payment vanish from your account. You realized you work 3 weeks out of every month just to maintain a lifestyle you barely have the physical energy to enjoy. You are working yourself into an early grave to impress people you do not even like. You fund your own permanent exhaustion. Luxury buys your daily compliance. Dropping the heavy rocks allows you to move fast, but walking through the door requires one final psychological death. In his 1532 treatise, The Prince, Niccolo Machiavelli studies a captured noble who begs his conqueror for mercy. The noble offers his heavy gold and his vast lands in exchange for his biological life. The conqueror smiles and accepts the heavy gifts. He executes the noble in the dark courtyard before the sun sets. The noble died because he handed his absolute leverage to the man holding the heavy iron sword. Machiavelli notes that a man must rely on forces he controls, not on forces controlled by others. When you plan your escape from the corporate machine, you seek the approval of your peers. You tell your coworkers about your side business and your massive future plans. You want them to validate your courage. You are begging the captured prisoners to bless your escape from the exact same heavy cell. You mentioned your massive exit plan to a senior colleague last Tuesday during a quiet coffee break. He listed 5 different reasons your plan would fail in the real market. He projected his own deep physical cowardice onto your fragile dream. You walk back to your desk feeling heavy doubt. Validation kills the massive escape.
Relying on forces you control means moving in total silence, preparing your mind to face the terrifying void waiting outside the wall. In his 1946 book, Man's Search for Meaning, psychiatrist Viktor Frankl describes the psychological shock of prisoners liberated from brutal camps. The prisoners walk out of the heavy iron gates and look at the open green fields. They do not feel immediate joy. They feel a terrifying emptiness. Because the rigid structure that dictated their daily survival has vanished. The external pressure that defined their every waking moment is gone. The corporate hierarchy is a miserable cage, but it provides you with a clear purpose and a predictable daily routine. When you finally quit your job and break the heavy chains, you will face the terrifying void of total freedom. The open field holds no instructions. You must generate your own internal purpose because the massive system will no longer hand you a structured schedule. You imagine waking up on a Monday morning with nowhere to be and no boss to answer. You think it sounds like a perfect paradise. The truth is that without a heavy personal mission, that quiet morning will devolve into deep depression. You will stare at the ceiling and feel completely useless. Freedom crushes the unprepared mind. The corporate maze was designed to exhaust your biological energy before you ever located the heavy exit door. Whoever severed their emotional attachment to the public hierarchy secured their physical independence in absolute silence. Musashi walked out of his dark mountain cave with a heavy wooden sword and defeated the greatest duelists in the nation. He did not seek their validation or care about their formal titles. He commanded the physical space with unshakable internal power.
The historical operators shared their hidden blueprints only with those who stepped into the quiet shadows to look. The screen you are looking at right now holds the modern version of that exact forbidden knowledge. Every significant financial outcome in your life followed from one decision made without complete vision. This is one of those moments. You are now on the side that sees.